Hillbrook Insane Asylum Patient File Update. Entry by Dr. Quinton Quartermain. Patient number 856, Wendell Accardo, aka the Wheel of Fate. Quite possibly the most pretentious sounding nickname given so far. The patient's psychosis has undergone an interesting development recently. His obsession with balance appears to have extended to the condition of his cell, no doubt due to the amount of time he's spent there. Despite the room having been reorganized to his specifications, making sure it is inch by inch perfectly symmetrical, he's now becoming agitated over there being more dust particles on the left than there are on the right. I'm hereby putting in a request for the patient to be given more free time outside his cell. Exposure to less familiar sights might help break him out of this behavior. Though in some ways this could be a good sign. It displays his mental illness can still be affected by outside influences, which ultimately could lead to his rehabilitation. Not that he himself is eager to change, of course. Why would anyone when they've been given such a grand purpose? I know some may disagree, but I always think it's dangerous to start believing your actions are somehow extensions of, or are influenced by, some higher power. That we ourselves are not fully in control of our lives, our fates, if you will. True, we may not always be fully in control of how our lives turn out. I know that all too well. But we are all responsible for our actions, and must face their inevitable consequences. Now, whether being locked up here in Hillbrook is a proportionate consequence to Mr. Accardo's actions, well, that's rather up for debate. Jessica awoke to find herself in complete darkness. Feeling about, she found the room was unfamiliar to her. She called out, screaming for help. None came. Trying to calm herself, she thought back to what she last remembered, in hopes of piecing together how she got here. She'd been out on the town, hanging out with the girls, maybe had a bit too much to drink, which would explain the pounding headache she was now nursing, but she had done the responsible thing by walking home instead of driving. She must have been about halfway there when she blacked out, and then she was here. Not exactly much to work off. A light suddenly came on, nearly blinding Jessica with its intensity. The room was tiny, no bigger than the average jail cell, though even jail cells at least had beds. It was old, grimy, and while none was visible, the distinct scent of blood permeated the air. A voice came over an intercom system. "Welcome. I apologize for the means I used to bring you here, but know that it was necessary, and that you are now in good hands. For too long, each of you have been unbalanced, left astray by the evils of society. Tonight, we shall bring that to an end. Now, step forth and make your choice." Jessica's attention was drawn to the locked door of the room, the only visible way in or out. On the door there were 6 buttons, arranged in a circle, each with a small green light above them. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do, but when one light changed to red, its corresponding button pressed in by itself. Another did the same, and then another. Soon all but one was pressed in. Left with no other option, Jessica gingerly pressed it, turning the last green light red. A moment later, the door to her cell swung open. Rushing through, it led her into a much larger, but no less unwelcoming room. A large circular table sat in the very middle, 5 chairs surrounding it. She was then startled by another voice, one that was in the room with her. Turning around, she saw a series of doors identical to hers, out from which more people stepped. There were 6 doors, each one numbered accordingly. From door number 1 stepped a tall, muscular man in an expensive-looking all-white suit. He looked to be in his late 20s, and from the gold that covered the rings on his fingers and the grill on his teeth, was clearly somebody who, up until this point, had been doing pretty well for himself. The man who stepped out of door number 2 couldn't have been more different. He was old and shaggy looking. His clothes were raggedy old things that were awash with filth and grime. All the hallmarks you'd identify the typical homeless person with. Door number 3 had been Jessica's door. Out from door number 4, a petrified young lady with a pair of thick-rimmed glasses shambled out. By far the smallest one present, she looked to be just a few years younger than Jessica, who was at first perplexed by her slow, uneasy walk, until she noticed the damaged prosthetic limb where her left leg should be. A few steps in, it came apart and she fell, Jessica running over just in time to catch her, with the old man from door number 2 soon joining her, asking the girl if she was alright. Door number 5 never opened. It remained locked, though one could hear the faint yelling of someone inside. Finally, from door number 6, a fairly large, middle-aged man with unkempt hair and a thick 5 o'clock shadow stepped out. He seemed to be surprisingly calm given the situation, although one might have more accurately described him as zoned out. The 5 of them stood around, confused. Number 4 seemed to be on the verge of a panic attack, Jessica and number 2 trying to consolidate her, even if they themselves were also scared beyond belief. Number 1 was angry, shouting for whoever was behind this to show himself. And as for number 6, well, he barely seemed aware of where he was, let alone what was happening. Then they heard the voice once more. "Congratulations. The universe smiles upon the 5 of you. You still have a chance to be rebalanced. The fate of number 5, however, has long been decided, it seems. As such, she shall be granted mercy." All eyes were then drawn to door number 5, as the previous yelling became louder, soon turning into a scream. Before long, all fell silent, as blood began seeping out from under the door. 1 down, 5 remaining. Things were never easy for Wendell Ricardo. Oh, by the way, I'm experimenting with the format of this one a little, so fair warning, this story might get a little confusing in places. Things were never easy for Wendell Ricardo. An antisocial person by nature, he often kept to himself, which, of course, made him a target for bullying during school. Maybe it was his name or his poor background, but whatever the reason, Wendell's peers were determined to make his life a living hell. Not that said life was all that cheery to begin with, of course. He'd lost his parents long ago, being left in the care of his grandma Agnes, who, regardless of her best efforts, wasn't really equipped to provide for a child. Living out in a trailer park on minimum wage, she was barely able to provide for herself. But she loved her grandson, and she was going to support him no matter what. Whenever he came home, teary-eyed from the insults and attacks he'd endured that day, she'd be there to comfort him, reassuring him that, in time, things would get better. That those bullies were wasting their education, their futures, and would never go anywhere in life. He just had to ignore them, because if you put in the effort, work hard, and do your best, you'll be rewarded for it in the end. It's only fair that good things happen to good people. Wendell took these teachings to heart. School life remained difficult and lonesome, but he knew now that it would be worth it, that there was a light at the end of this tunnel. He found his calling in engineering, said that he enjoyed working with machines. Probably could have pursued a degree had he been able to afford a university, but once he was done with college, it was straight on to looking for work. He needed income. Because despite all her good deeds, the only reward his grandma got in return was dementia. The five stood there in horror. Jessica felt like she wanted to throw up. Number 4 was becoming hysterical. Number 1, who up until this point thought this was all some elaborate prank, was only now beginning to look scared. But before any of them could truly process any of this, the voice returned. The realignment shall indeed be painful. Be assured, though, that you will not be left to wallow in the hopeless abyss. Either the universe recommits itself to a new direction, or you shall be mercifully ripped from it. Now, let us move on to the next stage. The table in the center of the room then lit up. Taking a closer look, the group found that with its color scheme and seating arrangement, it somewhat resembled a poker table. Be seated, the voice said. It is time to play. That's when it dawned on them. The button pressing back in their cells, it had been a game. A game someone had lost. And from the sound of their unseen captor, it would be far from the last game they'd play. Before anyone could start to panic again, however, number 2 stepped up. The old man addressed the group, pointing out to them that if this psycho wanted them to play some twisted life or death game, then surely the smartest move was to not play. Can't lose if you don't compete. Jessica concurred. Her parents would have noticed she's missing by now. The police were probably looking for them already. All they had to do was wait it out. Just as everyone breathed a sigh of relief, the voice spoke up, addressing number 2 specifically, asking if he was refusing to comply with the rules. When he answered yes, there was a moment of quiet, the voice not responding. For that moment, the old man felt rather pleased with himself. But then the silence was broken by an eerie beeping noise. Looking about, the old man soon found the source. The collar that had been fitted around his neck. The deafening bang took everyone off guard. Seeing number 2's head get completely blown off was more than Jessica's stomach could take, throwing up on the floor while the girl next to her screamed her lungs out. Defying one's fate leads only to more suffering, the voice carried on, seemingly undisturbed by this gruesome scene. There was no other option for him. Now, be seated. It is time to play. Each reaching for their own necks to find an identical collar, they all realized that if they didn't comply, they too would meet an explosive end. Not wasting another moment, number 1 legged it to the table. After wiping the bile from her mouth, Jessica saw number 4 having a breakdown. While not in the best of states herself, Jessica could tell this girl needed support more than she did. So, putting on a brave face, she reassured her that she'd stay by her side, before helping her to the table. Number 6 soon joined them, having noticed what everyone else was doing and figuring he should do the same. Under the instructions of the voice, they all sat down and laid back in their chairs, allowing an overhead restraint to clamp down, rather like the safety harnesses you find on roller coasters. These were to keep them in place, but left their arms free so they could play. A machine fitted into the center of the table began spewing out cards for each of them. as the voice began explaining, for the sake of the uninitiated, the basics of Go Fish. Number 1, having played before, asked where the chips were. The voice informed them that there were no chips, directing their attention upward. Hanging above each chair was what appeared to be the remnants of a lawnmower. Rules were simple. Each time you lose, your set of spinning blades lower slightly. Lose 5 times, and, well, you can imagine what comes next. 2 down. 4 remaining. Wendell couldn't afford to be picky with his job. He'd have taken anything. Eventually, he landed a gig at Blakeson Steelworks, a major manufacturer of building metals, and was assigned to the factory floor given the general labor tasks, moving merchandise or keeping bay areas clean. Once the higher-ups caught wind that he was good with machines, however, he started putting double duty as an engineer since the company had a shortage. It was surprising just how small the workforce was. There were days they worked with nothing more than a skeleton crew. It was the company's way of maximizing revenue. After all, less employees meant less paychecks to give out. Unfortunately, it also meant more work. Shifts were insanely long and overtime was pretty common. But as always, Wendell endured. He was doing good work. Doing good meant good things would happen to him. And whenever those things failed to happen, well, clearly he just wasn't doing enough. It only motivated him to work even harder. This cycle of thought persisted for quite some time, only beginning to falter when Agnes's condition worsened. Wendell had been doing his best to care for her, but with his increased workload, he was finding it harder and harder to make time for her. Eventually, he decided to ask management if he could have some time off. He'd been employed there a while and thought he might be entitled to some holiday. Turns out, doing so wasn't quite as simple as he thought. Getting in touch with the bosses was a lengthy process, and with his schedule already maxed out, finding the time to do so was next to impossible. Even when he did manage to get a word in, he was told he'd need to book an appointment before discussing business, extending the process further, and making the inevitable moment where any request he made was shot down all the more disappointing. He insisted that he just needed a bit of free time, not for himself, just enough for him to drive his grandmother up to a caring home a couple of towns over, as there was none near where he lived. Still, management remained unsympathetic. This all came to a boiling point on the day the move was supposed to take place. About halfway into his 12-hour shift, Wendell received a phone call. Didn't have time to check it until lunch break. It was from the hospital. Apparently, Agnes had decided to go for a wander and had ended up stepping out into a busy street. She got hit by a car, and while the doctors tried their best, in the end, they were unable to save her. Needless to say, Wendell didn't take the news well. Management said they were sorry, but there was nothing they could do. Wendell said that there was. They could have given him what he deserved. He followed the rules, he did the job, he had done the good deed. When he was asked to leave, he completely lost it. Ended up attacking 2 members of staff. He was promptly fired and ended up facing a prison sentence for the assault. Let me tell you, being locked away, it gives you a lot of time to think, to reflect. Wendell put a lot of thought into what had happened. He was just so confused. He'd been a good person, but good things weren't happening to him. Meanwhile, his bosses had done terrible things, refused sick days, ran employees ragged, yet good things always seemed to happen to them. This is in spite of the fact that Blakeson Steelworks was shut down a couple years later for gross workers' rights violations, but anyway. And then, when he'd done something bad himself, he was punished for it. None of it seemed fair. None of it made sense. And Wendell wasn't sure he could live in a world that didn't make sense. Jessica was sweating bullets. She'd already lost 3 life points, 2 more and she was out. The others weren't faring much better. Each of them were at least a few inches closer to brutal death than when they started. She was honestly contemplating if the explosive collar would be a preferable way to go out. Would certainly be quicker. But at such close proximity to the others, it would run the risk of setting them off too, so perhaps the overhead death trap was somewhat warranted, in a morbid kind of way. Thankfully, this macabre train of thought was derailed by number 4 hesitantly asking if she had any 5s. Jessica checked her hand. Nope, go fish. Soon the round was over and the score was totted up. In Go Fish, the goal is to collect sets of 4 of a particular numbered card. Number 1 had won by a clear mile with 4 sets. Tied for second were Jessica and number 4 with 2 sets apiece. In last was number 6 with just 1 set, which coincidentally was also the same number of life points he had left. Whatever he had been on this whole time, it seemed, had just now worn off as he was suddenly awake and alert. However, he wasn't able to do much with this moment of clarity, besides scream in agony as the spinning blades began slicing through his scalp. The grass guard of the lawnmower had been left in, but it still did little to shield the rest of the table from the resulting spray. Their clothes now stained red, the remaining 3 hostages were released from their seats, a large door opening up nearby. Once again, number 1 was the first to react, practically sprinting down the corridor. Jessica stayed behind, however, to assist number 4, allowing the girl to lean on her as balance. As they walked, the pair got to talking. She said her name was Sophie, worked in accounting, lost her leg in a railway accident when she was 8, just as her parents were going through a messy divorce. She had been stuck with her addict father, suffering under his abuse for the longest time. After the day he overdosed, she tried getting her life back on track, had plans to move away, but as of right now was barely making enough to scrape by. Jessica was taken aback. By comparison, she'd had it easy. Moderately wealthy parents, decent neighborhood, good honest job. She'd already been questioning what she had done to deserve being here, but this girl? Surely she'd been through enough already. It wasn't fair. So, as they entered the next room, sitting down at a table similar to the one from before, Jessica made a decision. She was going to get Sophie out of here and start giving her the life she deserved, instead of the one she'd been dealt. 3 down, 3 remaining. Wendell was released from prison a changed man. A lost man. His understanding of the world, his entire belief on how it all worked, had been shattered. And without that understanding, how was he supposed to live? To survive out there? As far as he was concerned, it wasn't possible. Wasn't worth trying. Better to throw it all away. And that's precisely what he intended to do. Blow what little he had left on a big trip to Vegas. Go out in style, have some fun before he bit the big one. Although, when he got into the casino, he could only afford a few hundred chips, so said fun was probably going to be short-lived. He ended up at one of the poker tables, amongst several card sharks, a couple of wealthy playboys, and some overzealous tourists. As the night droned on, the chips kept piling up. Some folded, recognizing that they were amongst the big-time players with how much they were putting on the table. Wasn't long until Wendell was forced to go all in. A meager addition to a growing haul. He sighed as the others laughed. He wasn't paying the game much attention at this point. He thought this city was all about games and pleasure, but he wasn't feeling it. All he felt was emptiness. This dull, pointless endeavor would be it. A fitting end to his meaningless existence. Finally, it came to the showdown. Wendell laid out his cards. 10 of clubs. Jack of clubs. Queen of clubs. King of clubs. Ace of clubs. He won! He'd won the game! The money was his! He cleaned out the whole bloody table! But it didn't stop there. After that, he tried his hand at the slot machines. Instant jackpot. Roulette table. Bets on 13 black. Ball lands on 13 black. Takes a spin at the Wheel of Fortune. Wins the sports car. Wendell Accardo had hit the greatest win streak in history. The man walked in on the verge of bankruptcy and walked out a billionaire. With that much money, he was pretty much set for life. It would have been his happy ending. It could have been. It should have been. Jessica's eyes darted back and forth between her cards and the other players. The tension in this game of blackjack was positively electric. Literally, because each of them was sat at a makeshift electric chair. 5 life points again, except this time, each loss would charge their chair's voltage by a certain amount. The goal of blackjack is to draw cards, trying to add up to 21. Go over 21, you lose. Score lowest out of the 3, you also lose. The rules may have been cut and dry, but Jessica was unsure on what to do. Sophie was down by 4, tears streaming down her face. Jessica wanted nothing more than to comfort her, but the restraints kept them out of each other's reach. Probably for the best, because if she could have, Jessica would have punched out number 1's lights by now. The smug prick was grinning, if you could believe it. Sure, he was winning, but did he have to look so happy about it? How was he okay with someone else dying so he could live? That's when it occurred to Jessica. Even if she or Sophie somehow pulled out a win, one of them would still have to die. It was clear that with the way things were going, these games wouldn't stop until only one of them was left standing. This left her with a dilemma. If she loses on purpose, Sophie immediately moves on to the final round, giving her a 50-50 chance of getting out. But then she'd be up against number 1, the experienced player, all by herself. Didn't matter to her that most of the game was based around pure dumb luck, that still seemed unfair. However, Sophie was on her last chance, as was Jessica. Number 1 still had 3 points. What were the chances they whittled those down in time? No, there was only one option. Jessica felt that perhaps she hadn't always been as generous as she maybe should have been. But if she could do this one thing, sacrifice herself to give another a fighting chance, she'd at least die a worthwhile death. She checked her cards. She was only at 13, fairly low, so she stayed. It was time to reveal their hands, and as Sophie revealed hers, it became abundantly clear what she was crying over. A 5, a 7, and a 10. She'd gone over. Jessica called out to the voice, begging him not to do this. Take her instead. Sophie didn't deserve this. The voice either didn't hear her, or just didn't care. The chair's voltage maxed out, unleashing its charge directly into its victim. She violently rocked back and forth, her hair setting alight as her skin began to burn. When it was over, all that was left was a charred corpse, her face contorted into a permanent expression of complete terror. Upon being released, it took every fibre in Jessica's being not to tear number 1 to shreds as he jumped out of his chair, overjoyed by his latest victory, and all too confident about his next. The uncertainty was now gone. Jessica knew what she had to do. She had to win, because there was no way she was going to let this selfish son of a demonetizing word be the one who makes it out alive. "It has come to this," the voice said as they entered the final room. "One more table, one more game. At last, you all know, without a shadow of a doubt, where you truly belong. If you are to be elevated or left below. Be seated. It is time to play." This room was different from the rest. It was suspended above a lower level. Beneath the grated floor, they could see a series of industrial-strength grinders. Spiked rollers, big and powerful enough to tenderize a semi-truck. Their seats were held in place with 5 metal clamps each. Despite the imminent danger, both sat down without hesitation nor fear. 4 down, 2 remaining. With more money than the average person earns in their entire life, you would think Wendell would be happy. I certainly would. But he wasn't. Not in the slightest. All this just served to confuse him further. Why had this happened? Why now? After going through so much pain and turmoil, only now does he receive some kind of payoff. And it hadn't been earned through a good or bad deed. He just randomly got unlucky. And that's when it hit him. That's when he understood the truth. Bless Grandma Agnes. He loved her dearly, but she was wrong. It doesn't matter whether you're good or bad, kind or cruel. The world isn't run by morality. It's run by society. Those at the top dictating the lives of those at the bottom. The rich crushing the poor. There was no sense of fairness, of balance. All that had been lost long ago, consumed by the ever-advancing reach of greed and corruption. How could anyone hope to reach their destiny with all these other forces leading them astray? But there was one force. One that was untainted by man's influence. And it was luck. Luck, by its very nature, was random. It was unbiased, pure, fair. It was an incorruptible constant, completely immune to any earthly evils. The only one of its kind. It could change the life of anyone. It should change the life of anyone. Yes, it made perfect sense. Too many were forced to live unbalanced lives. They suffered from the massive influxes of good or bad fortune brought about by those around them, causing them to lose sight of their place in the world. They were too ignorant to understand, but Wendell, he knew the truth. That's why this had happened. The universe had chosen him to set things right. Those who were worthy of living joyous, happy lives, he could raise them out from the depths. And those destined to be left in the dark, to suffer, he could save them too. But then came the question of how. How was he to implement this grand rebalancing? To find and differentiate these people? A contest? No, too many ways to cheat. Some kind of trivia quiz? No, that was unfair and the less knowledgeable. Flip a coin? No, it's been proven one side is slightly heavier than the other. It's not balanced. There has to be balance. And that's when he realized, of course, just how he had been realigned, he could do the same for others. No skill, no advantages, just luck. It was all in the cards. Jessica and her opponent had been going for what felt like hours now. Both had the conviction to win, but did they have the cards? Number one certainly seemed to, putting down a straight flush, causing another clamp to unlock itself from Jessica's chair. She never did get around to learning his name. though it was probably for the best that she didn't. This would be a pretty bad time to humanize him, considering what she was trying to do. She wasn't faring half bad herself, however. Her earlier three of a kind managed to snag her the win last round, meaning they had just now equalized. This next play would decide it all. The auto dealer spewed out card after card, Jessica's steely expression crumbling bit by bit with each one. When she reached her fifth and final card, it fell away altogether. She sank as far as her restraints allowed, weeping as she cried out to her opponent, pleading for him to let her live, to show some humanity. Number 1 just laughed at this display, showing his hand, a 2-pair, whilst mockingly asking why she didn't just fold. That's when Jessica revealed her hand, a smirk working its way onto her face, as all the colour drained from his. 2 sixes and 3 queens. Full house. Number 1 stared in disbelief, his jaw hanging open as the gravity of what had just happened settled in. He had lost the game and was about to lose a hell of a lot more. He cried out in futility, struggling to get free as the final clamp disengaged, dropping him into the death trap below. Jessica was thankfully spared watching the gruesome results, only afterwards being released. Her smile was now gone. With how she'd felt moments ago, she thought she'd be happy with his demise, but she wasn't. Nothing felt good about what she just did. She wasn't given long to contemplate the matter further, as a door at the far end of the room opened up. Entering, she found herself in an empty, dark expanse, door slamming shut behind her. A single spotlight illuminated her from above, providing some, if minimal, visibility. "Rejoice," the voice declared. "Where 6 points of fluctuation once festered, now stands only one perfectly balanced being. The universe has cleared the path to your proper place. Now, go forth and claim what is most assuredly and rightfully yours." Another light came on, revealing in front of her a briefcase on top of a table. Given everything that had happened, Jessica was suspicious and very slow to open it. What lay inside, however, was neither a trap nor some demented game. It was, in fact, $20,000 US in cash. This left Jessica completely dumbfounded. The weight of her actions had just now sunk in. She had intentionally deceived Number 1, gotten him killed to save her own neck. She'd indirectly gotten 4 more people killed before that, and now she was, what, being rewarded for it? No. She couldn't accept this. It just wasn't right. No. She'd seen this movie before. It had to be some final test or something. So, she closed the briefcase and called out to whoever was watching to tell him that she wasn't taking this money. She didn't deserve it. An awkward silence hung through the room. Then, the light above the table switched off, and the sound of something heavy scraping along the floor could be heard, growing louder and louder. Something was approaching. And then, too late to do anything about it, she saw what it was. The walls. The walls were closing in on her. Up in his control booth, having observed all this from the very start, an older but certainly not wiser Wendell watched in disappointment, as Jessica frantically tried holding the walls back, bracing herself between them, to little effect. "Unfortunate," he sighed. "So many still cling to the lie of morality. Allow it to blind them from the truth. The truth that there is no good. There is no evil. There is only luck. We cannot control our fates, for by doing so, we corrupt the fates of those around us. We must let go and allow the universe to lead us by its own hand. Luck is its vessel, its conduit into the mortal plane. It is life itself. To deny such a thing, then, is to welcome only death. There was a police investigation following Mr. Ricardo's activities for quite some time. With multiple missing persons cases popping up, it was clear something was going on. He only ever took 6 people at any one time, 3 who he deemed as having experienced too much success in life, and those who hadn't experienced enough. Since the victims had nothing else in common, it made tracking him down more difficult. However, in the end, Mr. Ricardo was brought down by his own philosophy. For whenever one of his captives actually took the money, he really would let them go, leaving them 20k richer and mentally scarred for the rest of their lives. With a couple of living witnesses, they eventually caught up to him, found his base of operations built beneath an abandoned arcade. The report gets a little hazy around the specifics of his arrest, but the point is he was captured and sent here to Hillbrook, where he's remained ever since. With 27 murders under his belt, the news proclaimed him as one of the worst serial killers of his age. Of course, Mr. Ricardo would disagree. As far as he's concerned, he was performing a public service, that he's some kind of cosmic envoy here to save humanity, when in reality he's just a deeply troubled, impressionable man who's letting one moment dictate his entire life. He was so relentlessly beaten down by the system all throughout his upbringing, so confused by it, that when that one moment of amazingly good fortune rolled around, it must have felt like an enlightenment. It totally overwhelmed his persona in its magnitude, to the point where he practically worships the very concept of luck. It's a source of comfort. It simplifies what is to him an incomprehensible world into a manageable state. And of course, there's nothing wrong with having faith in some higher being. But when you start killing in support of it, you cross that line between the faithful and the fanatical. Perhaps then all I need to do is shake that belief of his. If I could talk him into a little game of our own, I wonder. Waffles, fetch my Uno set, would you?
Meow.
Good girl. End recording.